Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a very special evening celebrating the launch of Bachi Karkaria's new book and the second season at the Royal Opera House, Mumbai, since it reopened last year. My name is Asad Lalji. I'm the curator at the Opera House and I'm part of the Avid Learning team. And thank you all for spending your Sunday evening with us. I know we're in close competition with the IPL finale, so thank you for being here. The Royal Opera House, Avid Learning and Juggernaut are delighted to present this panel discussion to celebrate the author, journalist, columnist Bachi Karkaria and her new book, In Hot Blood, the Nanavati case that shook India. Did you enjoy the film Rustam and its glamorous 60s Bombay settings? Did the incredible true story behind the plot pique your interest? Now is your opportunity to know more about the twists and turns of Le Fair Nanavati, its famed cast of characters, and its rich milieu of 60s Bombay with today's panel discussion. We have author of the book, Bachi Karkaria, lawyer and politician, Mr. Ram Jethmalani, in conversation with journalist and editor of Scroll, Naresh Fernandes. They will examine the themes and repercussions of this groundbreaking case and the changing face of jurisprudence in India. But before we begin, I'd like to take a minute to tell you a little bit about this iconic building we all are sitting in. The Royal Opera House was widely known as Bombay's cultural crown jewel. It is India's only surviving opera house. It was inaugurated in 1911 by King George V and completed in 1916. The space eventually became a cinema in later years before closing its doors in the 90s. Owned by the royal family of Gondal, it was restored under the leadership of the current Maharaja of Gondal, Shri Jyotendra Singh Ji, and reopened after 23 years in October of last year. Today, it stands as a key performance and creative hub in the city's cultural landscape while being a premier heritage landmark. And now to the matter at hand, the Nanavati case. I'd like to invite on stage Vice Admiral Girish Luthra, Mr. Ram Jethmalani, Bachi Karkaria, and Naresh Fernandes to formally unveil the book and begin the discussion. As they make their way to the stage, a little more about our panelists. Bachi Karkaria is a veteran journalist, columnist with the Times of India. She also curates the Times of India Lit Fest. Ram Jethmalani is a member of Parliament, senior advocate, and eminent professor of law. He has served as India's Union Law Minister and the chairman of the Bar Council of India. He served as the Law Minister of India in addition to being Minister of Urban Development during the Prime Ministership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Even though he's primarily known as a criminal lawyer, he's appeared in many important cases concerning constitutional matters. He's also published many books and was elected to be president of the Supreme Court Bar Association. Naresh Fernandes, a journalist who lives in Bombay. He's the editor of Scroll.in, a digital daily. He's the author of two books, City Adrift, a short biography of Bombay, and Taj Mahal Foxtrot, the story of Bombay's jazz age. Welcome, Vice Admiral Girish Luthra, our esteemed panel. And now to the unveiling of the book, In Hot Blood, the Nanavati case that shook India. Thank you.
Well, this book has been evincing a lot of interest already. Last month or so, you would have seen a number of reviews and number of comments on this book already appearing. As the story is very, very old, but many people know that this is a case which refuses to die as far as the story is concerned. And from the legal point of view, it is still taught in many areas, many law schools, as a case study. We are very pleased to be here, and we would like to compliment the author, and the research that has gone behind this book. And we wish this book all success. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to this event. Exactly 10 years before the day I was born, the Bombay coroner conducted a post-mortem on the body of Prem Ahuja, the man whose murder would create fragments of memory that would linger in Bombay law for decades after. Reading Bachchi Karkaria's fascinating retelling of these events that we have come to know as the Nanavati case made me realize how familiar these stories seem to many of us, even those of us who came of age long after the Parsi naval commander received a pardon for the crime and disappeared into the anonymity of Toronto. On page 54 of the book, I ran into my neighbor, Uncle Dennis, or Lieutenant Commander Cooper, as he's referred to here, the gunnery officer of INS Mysore, who allowed Nanavati to check out the murder weapon from the ship's armory in 1959. Years after he retired, especially after he'd had his evening drink, Uncle Dennis would gather the boys of St. Cyril Road around him to recount his involvement with the trial and recall how he'd given Nanavati permission to carry away the .38 Smith & Wesson revolver because he said he feared for his personal safety on a road trip he was about to take. Just a little later, the action in Bachchi's book shifts to Southlands, the elegant Art Deco building at the edge of Colaba, just before the military area, where Nanavati's parents lived, as did my grandmother's sister. Sylvia Nanavati and her children moved to Southland shortly after the murder, and my father's cousins had a few stories to tell about what those months were like. And more than most things, they remembered what a warm person Sylvia was. As it turned out, the policeman to whom Nanavati surrendered immediately after committing the murder, John Lobo, also lived in Bandra. And early in my career as a crime reporter at the Times of India, I'd sought out John Lobo to photocopy his book, Leaves from a Policeman's Diary, and to interview him about the Nanavati case. Since 1959, a cloud of mythology has gathered around the murder of the Sindhi businessman by the handsome Parsi naval officer, who is, in every article about the case, referred to by the prefix dashing. One urban legend claims that when Nanavati wandered into the street after the shooting, gun in hand, a policeman directing traffic at the intersection ran away in fright. In Bombay law, the dashing commander Nanavati was such an upright man, he could not bear the thought of the traffic piling up chaotically. So he is thought to have directed cars and buses for half an hour before finally making his way to see John Lobo at the crime branch. By contrast, Prem Ahuja, Mr. Love, as he's called in one novel about these events, is always referred to with the prefix playboy. He was, as we know, a perfect cad, and when Nanavati confronted him and asked him what his plans with Sylvia were, he is reported to have said, "Do I have to marry every woman I sleep with? Get the hell out of here." We've retold these stories unquestioned for 60 years, but do they actually hold up? With the benefit of hindsight and lots of legwork, Bachchi Karkaria's In Hot Blood forces us to re-examine the notions we hold about the case and about ourselves. Why have we allowed ourselves to cast Sylvia as the poor innocent who was played like a puppet by the playboy Mr. Love? Was the dashing naval commander, Commander Nanavati, who has come to embody the very spirit of Indian nationhood, actually as deserving of a pardon as we think he is? How on earth did Bombay come to turn a murderer into a hero? These are some of the questions we will be discussing over the next hour with Bachchi Karkaria, the author of the book whose vivacious journalism you've all read now for years. She was already a veteran when I joined the Times of India as a callow trainee 28 years ago. And as this book proves, her energies show no sign of flagging. Also on our panel is Ram Jethmalani, whose eloquent interventions in court over the decades and whose passionate television appearances have turned him into a living legend. Mr. Jethmalani, as many of you all know, was a young lawyer during the trial, but most uncharacteristically, he did not say a word through the entire proceedings. That's because Prem Ahuja's sister, Mimi, had given him what's called a watching brief. He did not represent Ahuja, but was there to protect his interests and ensure that he was protected from malicious prosecution. So let's kick the evening off with Bachchi, who will read a section of the book to give us a sense of what she's talking about.
Hi, Naresh. Listening to all your stories, maybe you should have written the book, because you obviously had a head start, and I had to do all that legwork to find all these people. And they were right there in your neighborhood. Not fair. Not fair. You upstaged me once again. Okay, so this is the prologue, which will explain to you why this case remains relevant. The long shadow of an urban legend. Way back on 27th April 1959, a Parsi naval commander, Kavas Nanavati, shot dead his English wife Sylvia's Sindhi lover, Prem Ahuja. 3 bullets in less than 3 minutes is all it took. But the trial, which began the following September, held the nation in thrall for 5 years, and the story has continued to have an obsessive afterlife in films, books, even PhD theses. Its immediate allure is easy enough to explain. This was India's first upper-class crime of passion, and it titillated a society still in the socialist straitjacket. Pythagoras himself could not have come up with a more perfect triangle. Handsome officer in dazzling whites, seduced wife in repentant black, and the easily demonized dead playboy, businessman as well. There was the unequal pitting of upright Parsi against unscrupulous Sindhi. The setting infused the tale with its own legend. Bombay was an urban grail, a glittering cosmopolitan Camelot with streets paved with opportunity and stardust. The class, the caste, the context was such a triple whammy that they have knocked out all else. But those 3 quick shots fired by Commander Nanavati had a much wider reverberation, echoing right into the present. There are 3 main narratives that deserve greater engagement. The case. The high-octane drama from Sessions to Supreme Court apart, the case honed fine points of civil jurisprudence. It also foretold the way that elite mafias would manipulate the system to subvert justice. The Nanavati trial set a pattern, but it also remained unique in many ways. In none of its high-profile successors, which bloodied every decade since, were the topmost echelons of executive and judiciary locked in such a bristling turf war. In none of them was a prime minister himself obliged to intervene. The media. Courts are the de jure custodians of criminal justice, but a relentless fourth estate is often the de facto arbiter. In the hoary expression, vox populi, vox dei, the modern media, the voice of the people, increasingly arrogates to itself the voice of God. This too began with the weekly Bombay newspaper Blitz's espousal of Nanavati's cause. In those days of black and white, Blitz managed to create a technicolor story. In both content and form, it became the masterclass for the covering of crime. The triangle. None of the case's prodigious spin-offs has examined the extent to which privilege and prejudice loaded the dice of public perception. We have been even more coy about the complex man-woman question within marriage and outside. Geometry's triangles are simple, not so the ones compassed by chemistry. For too long, we believed in those cliches of unalloyed hero, unmitigated victim, and his unwitting victim. Unmitigated villain and his unwitting victim. They need to be deconstructed, if not actually dismantled. Did something less edifying lurk beneath the fanciful tapestry of love and honor woven by Nanavati's lawyer, Karl Khandalawala? Who was the human behind the unidimensional arch-villain, Prem Ahuja? Doesn't Sylvia deserve today's prism of empowerment? And what of the aftermath? The Canada years have remained unexplored till now. We know that Kavas and Sylvia's reconciliation made the defense team's job easier, but how did they ultimately weather the storm, salvage their marriage, and script a new love story? Despite the energy expended for over half a century on La Affaire Nanavati, it's not an open book, nor yet an open and shut case, not by a long shot.
Thanks so much, Bachi. I wondered if you could begin by telling us why you decided to revisit these events all this time later.
Yeah, is this on? Yeah, okay. Well, to be honest, I got commissioned by Juggernaut, and since I've been doing the Lit Fest, there'd been a lot of pressure, why aren't you writing a book? So I said, okay, let me try this, and the commissioning editor at that time said, write a short book, 30,000 words is fine. So I said, good, quickie. And, but then my colleague, Meenal, she said, no, you're not to write a short, quickie book on this because it's a very, very important case and you better just have a look at it first before you plunge into it and decide to do it. So this is what I did. And I did realize that why is it that this case has endured? That was the number one question. More than that, how was something that started in an adulterous bed end up needing a constitutional bench? Why did the Prime Minister himself have to jump in and intervene? And then I also thought that now that we are in the 21st century, we are 6 decades almost away from the case, surely we can have some detachment with hindsight. That those rose-colored spectacles with which we looked at Nanavati, the way we damned Prem Ahuja, surely bear scrutiny again. And as I went into the book, I realized that yes, there were very, very many more questions. There were very, very few answers. And then it became a challenge. It really became into a piece of investigative journalism.
Thanks, Bachi. Mr. Jethmalani, you have long attempted to debunk the hype that was built up around the Nanavati trial. In an interview to the Free Press Journal last year, you claimed that all the members of the jury, save one, had been bought off. It was a perverse verdict, you said. As we all know, the Law Commission had already submitted a recommendation for the jury system to be abolished, and that's what happened a little while later. But what are your most vivid memories of that trial when, as a young lawyer, you sat there for almost 3 weeks?
My very graceful hosts and this wonderful crowd collected here to hear something about this great sensational trial that took place in the history of India. But I must first tell you that I am running the 94th year of my life. I have no other political ambition of any kind. I am making peace with my Maker, and I have some debt which I owe to the people of India, and I wish to repay that debt in a very small manner. I am very proud that Bachi, you don't mind my using this familiar name of yours, has asked me to be present here. And when I asked her, what is my role going to be today? She said, nothing at all, only that the crowd was free to ask you questions. And I didn't realize at that time that it was not the audience merely, but my great cross-examiner is already here. And I assure you that he has been working for ages to be able to cross-examine me. However, I am ready for cross-examination. And before I face that, I want to fill up a few blanks in the book and a couple of points on which I have also a score to settle with my friend Bachi. At page 197 of this book, have you got a copy with you just now? It is I believe it is a part of the chapter which is a tirade against all the Sindhis. And every Sindhi has been mentioned and has been mentioned to show that as if Nanavati was the victim of some Sindhi conspiracy. And Bachi darling, I don't mean to quarrel with you, but just see one statement on page 197 of the book. I'm glad you found it yourself. After having talked of the whole Sindhi community, she has this sentence: law was the favorite profession. If the chief villain of the Nanavati case was a Sindhi, so was the lawyer Ram Jethmalani himself. Darling, will you tell the audience what did I do?
I've just said you were a Sindhi.
Obviously, I have already forgiven you because I believe that this was not a vicious utterance against me, but a slight mistake of the English language. All right. Then on the last page of this book, page 203, the third line on that page, the irascible Ram Jethmalani. What have I done to deserve that epithet? The irascible Ram Jethmalani, who put Nanavati into jail and then got him out of it. I'm sorry I neither put him in jail, nor did I really get him out. Of course, I helped to get him out, and for that, I'm skipping quite a few facts of the case. Fact remains that the judiciary, both the High Court and the Supreme Court of India, and none of these had a Sindhi judge or a Sindhi lawyer even appearing in the matter. He had been found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. One day, finishing my work somewhere else, reached my home, and right in my drawing room in my home, a very modest home, I found the famous Bombay lawyer Rajni Patel and Sylvia together sitting in my drawing room. I was quite surprised. So I asked Rajni Bhai, I said, Rajni Bhai, tell me, why have you brought this lady here? He said, you don't worry. She has come here with a purpose. The purpose was then disclosed to me that Nanavati by that time had filed a petition for pardon to the governor, and the governor himself, of course, is a formal authority, but paymaster and who was the other secretary there? Paymaster and anyway, both Parsi secretaries of the ministry had examined this file, and they almost apprehended that if we grant the pardon, the Sindhi community is going to create a big revolt in the city, and therefore, since I was a Sindhi myself, and I was appearing to help the prosecutor, briefed by Mimi, of course, the sister of Prem. They wanted me to see that there is no protest from the Sindhi community, and certainly not from Mimi Ahuja, my client, who was. I asked Sylvia, I said, Sylvia, are you serious in requesting me? You want to do this great action of grace? She says, yes. He has agreed to take me back, forgive me, and I have agreed to do this for him, that Mimi should forgive him too, and the Sindhi community, at her instance, will take it in good grace and be grateful. I said, well, Rajini is a friend whom I can't say no, and Sylvia, you yourself have come, and obviously now you want to help your aggrieved husband. I will certainly do my best to see that nothing of the kind happens. I have now one more score to settle with you, Bachi, darling, but in a very friendly way. According to me, the heroine in this whole story was Mimi Ahuja. After I had a chat with her, and I told her that you know that your brother was a playboy. It was not merely Sylvia he was playing with, but some other women too, and very highly placed women at that. I mean, a young unmarried man with wealth in his pocket, good-looking man too. If women are after him, nobody can blame him for making use of them. But be sure, Sylvia, don't worry about it. Everything will go right. I know Mimi. She is the most kind-hearted woman that I have seen in my little life. I went to her and I talked to her. I said, listen, you know that your brother was a slanderer and he was not doing anything which could be considered very praiseworthy. Of course, his extenuating circumstance was that he was a handsome man and many women ran after him and his money. But at least he was guilty. And he was guilty for which he has paid. He has been killed. Now he is making peace with God. And I have come here to ask you to forgive him. Forgive him so that even God the Maker is kind and something good turns out for Nanavati and Sylvia, who are now reconciled, obviously. Otherwise, Sylvia wouldn't come to me and make this kind of a request. Mimi was so gracious that she signed a written document and gave that letter, which I had delivered. Not only I delivered that letter, but she saw to it that she advised the entire Sindhi community that my brother did deserve a punishment. He has got a punishment which he deserved. Now please forgive him and also forgive Nanavati for what he has done. He may have committed a criminal offense, but let us save him. Mind you, there was not one outcry from the Sindhi community, and it is both the Parsi secretaries who were reluctant and somewhat apprehensive of what will happen in society, because it was a plain case of unprovoked murder. He had shot a young man who was in his bathroom with a towel on, and this whole story that is invented, that he said, am I to marry every woman that comes to me and so on and so forth? Nothing of the kind. That was an invention of the lawyers. But, my friends, I want to tell you something more, which you must know, that Memi deserves a great prize for the Parsi community, and she deserves a prize from society that she did this wonderfully graceful act, and I have not seen a woman so kind that she played this particular part. And darling, you have been a little unfair to her. Make up for it some other time. She is no more. How did I appear in the case? I didn't appear in the case to earn money. One public prosecutor who was appearing in the criminal case, I even keep forgetting his name. What name did you tell me? Trivedi. He was a friend of mine at the bar and many years ago. And I had come as a refugee from Pakistan myself, from Sindh. You have written a whole chapter on Sindhis, which is again extremely unfair. Extremely unfair.
I thought I've redeemed the Sindhis.
No, darling. Listen, no, you have not. You have given an impression. I mean, you have sometimes even put a fault on Justice Chanani, who had nothing to do with this case at any time. And the trial in the High Court also was held by two other judges, Shaillat and some other judge. And certainly, there was no Sindhi juror in the jury. There was no judge Sindhi who was a Sindhi in the High Court, in the Sessions Court, or before the jury, and there was not one Sindhi juror amongst the 9. Well, I agreed with Trivedi, told me that please you come and appear in this case and help me because there's a battery of big lawyers appearing against me and I want some assistance in this case. I said, listen, you talk to Memi. I've heard of her, but I'm not a very great friend of hers. If she agrees, I can come. And my role is only to help you in the case because at that time, a private counsel appearing for even instructed relative of the victim had no locus standi on his own. He could only assist the public prosecutor. And I took on that role. And we had prepared an opening speech of the public prosecutor before the jury, because every jury trial used to start with an opening address by the public prosecutor. And it was an open and shut case. It didn't require any great evidence to prove it or great skills to prove it. And the first day when the trial started before a jury, Mr. Trivedi got up to deliver his opening address to the judge, to the jury, and I found that the address which he gave before the jury on that opening day was not the address which we had prepared jointly at home and which almost I had written out, but it was a totally different speech. And my God, I was so angry with the man because I knew that he has been bought. On the first day evening, I decided not to appear any longer in the case. And next day I didn't appear in court. And on the third day again, Mr. Trivedi walked into my house in the evening after the court hours. I said, Trivedi, how have you come here? I said, I'm very angry with you. Obviously, you have made up with the accused and you delivered that kind of a fancy speech that you delivered, more to get him out rather than to have him convicted. He said, Ram, I'm apologetic. I must apologize to you. But you see the extenuating circumstance in which I have done this. He agreed that he is going to plead guilty to a charge of culpable homicide not amounting to a murder, and he will receive a lighter sentence, as always is done in those cases where it is not murder but culpable homicide not amounting to murder. And I said, he told me that I am myself ashamed that they have gone back on that promise and now they are trying to get an acquittal in the case. So do please come back. I went back and again with the permission of Memi, I told her, Memi, this is what the prosecutor has told me, and he is repentant. If you want me to assist him, I am prepared to do it, but please, you are not bound and you... She says, no, Ram, I want you to go. Let us do our best. Anyway, I was there throughout the trial. There was a non-Sindhi judge and there was not one Sindhi juror amongst the 9. They had made up with the whole jury. They were fighting for an acquittal. And my friends, out of the 9 jurors, one was a man of greater conscience than the other 8. And this one juror who dissented from the 8 was a godsend. Godsend for the prosecution. Because otherwise the judge is bound by a unanimous verdict of the jury. A divided verdict of however big the majority is, he is not bound and he has to refer the matter to the High Court for disposal. He can't acquit on his own. That is exactly what happened, that the jury had been bought and returned a verdict which was so perverse on the facts of the case, and I am speaking as a lawyer now, that it was a perverse verdict. A man goes into the house of the person he wants to kill, goes and finds out that he is in the bathroom. He doesn't wait. He goes into the bathroom when the man is only a towel on, and there was no conversation. He shot point blank at a revolver which he had issued on a false pretext from the naval archives. Well, that's okay. Now all that happened, the judge referred the matter to the High Court because he felt that the verdict was perverse. No reasonable person could ever arrive at the verdict. But my friends, the matter came before the High Court, and in the High Court, the public prosecutor was Mr. Chandrachud then, a young man who later became the Chief Justice of India. He was a friend of mine. We used to almost sit and have a drink every evening. Well, I was assisting him. He was only worried about one problem of law, because the poor judge had directed the jury very carefully, as carefully as he could, and it was very clear that he stood for a conviction in the case. But nevertheless, in his anxiety, because when in your mind you know that a man is guilty, you want to be little more fair to him than even otherwise, he committed some errors of law. Each of the errors that he committed, of course, it didn't make any difference because the jury had been bought for an acquittal. Well, my contribution in the whole case as a lawyer has been to explain to my young friend Chandrachud at that time that I will show you 10 misdirections, mistakes of misdirection by the judge to the jury, and don't worry, you don't have to prove to the High Court that the verdict was perverse or anything of that kind. It is enough to show to them that it was wrong.
Thanks so
My
much,
friend,
Mr.
we
Jethmalani.
succeeded.
Maybe at this stage we can move
Yeah,
back to
yeah, yeah.
Bachchi.
We
and
succeeded.
get a
I'll
sense
take
of
2
how
more
the trial,
minutes.
Actually, all this is in the book. All the points.
I am telling you that the High Court was right, and the High Court the impression that you have created in the Sindhi chapter is that Chainani had something to do with it. Nothing of the kind.
No, Mr. Chainani was in the High Court when the appeal was
Doesn't matter,
heard.
darling. Listen, you
How
know
can I
that
argue with you,
today,
Ram?
if you read the whole chapter on Sindhi, it almost shows that that the Sindhis have managed this conviction.
No, you're not reading the book. It's exactly
But
the opposite.
Listen, you mentioned me as well.
I've written everything that you told me.
Okay,
all
now
that you're
listen,
saying now.
it's over, and I must tell you
I have to defend my book.
that today the memory of Memi Ahuja as a woman who had rendered great service to justice must be acknowledged by everybody who has some few drops of fresh blood and some kind of gratitude to the goodness of that woman. And I must tell you also that at that time there was a great Sindhi leader, Bhai Pratap, who had been convicted in a sessions court on a petty offense of some 420 or 406, something like that, given a sentence of 18 months. And his sentence had been enhanced to 4 years by the Supreme Court. Now, he had also filed the pardon application, and that was also before the same secretaries. And those secretaries said that, Mr. Jethmalani, we have read the petition of this great man. He was a great philanthropist from Sindh who had served the community of Sindh. He was building a city for the Sindhi refugees in Kandla. And the reward of it was that he was being, and he said, we know that the case is false, and be sure that if the Sindhis help, we are also going to deal with the same pardon application by Bhai Pratap. And Bhai Pratap and Nanavati were pardoned by the governor on the same day, and I believe that he owes that pardon to me and to Memi Ahuja. Now, I am open to cross-examination first by him and then by any one of you who chooses to ask any questions. Be sure that I am now speaking completely without the slightest anger or dissatisfaction with my beautiful friend, the writer of this good book. I must pay a tribute to her knowledge of English literature. Every sentence in that book is worth a reward, and I must say that it is one of the best literary achievements which I have seen in recent times. And I am quite sure that Bachi didn't mean to be mean. It's her,
So I've antagonized the Parsis, and now I've antagonized the
It is her
Sindhis as
generosity
well.
that after having written that whole chapter against Sindhis, she has again
It's not
invited me here.
against the Sindhis.
I think this is an-
Please go. The book is available
Go on now,
outside.
come on.
I think this is a perfect moment, Bachi, for you to talk about the Parsi networks and how you think Nanavati benefited from being a Parsi, and then you can piss off the other half of this audience.
Well,
Why don't you read? You want me to sit there now? Yeah.
actually, I thought I had redeemed the Sindhis, but obviously my powers of communication are not what I thought they were. Anyway, so Ram, I've said everything that you told me in that thing, and I just need to defend. I need to defend my book.
And you know I'm one of your admirers.
Yes. So Justice Chainani was there when the appeal was heard and when they were deciding whether the governor had overstepped his powers, but we will discuss that later. I have really, in fact, in this book, have actually pointed out that Commander Nanavati really got away because of his own sense of entitlement. And this sense of entitlement sprang from two sources. One, that he was a Bombay Parsi at a time when the Parsis were the aristocracy of the city. the business aristocracy, the cultural aristocracy, the legal aristocracy, and everything. And the second thing which gave him a sense of entitlement was that he was bred in all the traditions of the Navy. And if you have sort of, moved in with those world navies, rubbed shoulders with the likes of Mountbatten, gone to the world capitals, and been the defense attaché with V.K. Krishna Menon, and had all these traditions that I got to learn as a result of working on this book, I mean, I could understand that he felt that, he could do no wrong and that he could be asked no questions, and he certainly wouldn't have to give any answers. So I will just, if you don't mind, read a little bit of that, which is, clearly fate had marked Kavas Nanavati for special attention. Had he, like a hero of Greek tragedy, been raised to the skies, only to be raised to the ground by the gods angered by his hubris? Even did he know of the astrologer's prediction at his birth that he would grow up to shake the world? And was it whispering seductively into his subconscious as he strode into Ahuja's bedroom and gave a demonstration of his proficiency with moving targets? Even without this higher calling, there were two major factors which would have given him a heightened sense of self, convinced him that killing his wife's lover was the most honorable thing a man could do. No questions to be asked, no answers deigned to be given. Both factors helped him to execute the murder with a style that did not stain his class. He confronted, he shot, and he reported the crime. His birth and his career were the two factors that gave him the right to believe that he did no wrong. Simply by being born and raised Parsi in a Bombay built by his community was enough to place him in a privileged niche. Secondly, the marinade of the Royal British Navy, the pomp of ceremony, the tumultuous welcome in the world sports, the admiration of admirals, all coalesced to buttress the entitlements that emanated from his birth. Now, you asked me about the Parsis, and I think I've had quite a bit of a tongue-in-cheek chapter on the Parsis, and I don't know whether I want to read all that, but it's really was that, it's called Bombay Was a Parsi. And it is that if the Parsis thought that they owned the city, they weren't entirely wrong. For over a century, Bombay was cast in the image of the Parsis. And if you didn't believe this, you only had to look at and count the statues. Then I said, if the Parsis thought they were the city's only aristocracy, they weren't entirely wrong. Before the age of Azad celebrity, the A-list comprised their authentic aristocrats, topped by the dowagers, Lady Dagan, Lady Saklatwala, Lady Jivanji Modi, and Lady Kavasji Jahangir, as well as Dinbai Dubash, chatelaine of that wedding cake mansion, Mount Nepean. They were on their last legs and their three-legged walking sticks. But they still held court, soirees, banquets, and at homes. The formidable Gul Shavak Shah had founded in 1933 the Time and Talents Club. Cynical Cyruses mocked the name, saying its members had lots of time and very few talents. And in the plays of the irrepressible theatre genius Adi Marzban, the members of this club were referred to as Malbar Hilni Mehna. They were in fact brilliantly plumed birds of a feather who flocked to organize and patronize high-profile social activities. And then
But in addition to the Parsis having the sense of themselves as an entitled community, the city recognized the Parsis as being something special, and this was clear from the crowds that turned out every day at the trial court to cheer on Nanavati. Tell us something about that.
You know, I can't see the audience, but we've sort of got all the people I talked to and who helped me a lot, and many of them who were there. I can see my cousin Zenobia. I can't see Mike Bhada. And I really want to acknowledge the help of Mike Bhada, who uninvited, who strolled into an interview that I was doing with Admiral Avati. And I said, oh my God, why is this man cutting into my time? But then these two old salts started talking about the Navy. And I realized that, oh my God, I really must bring in all these toasts and stories that they're telling. And then he went and he helped me to get the books, Admiral Nanda's book about, how he brought the Mysore into Bombay after it being commissioned. And then he went on a cruise. He went on a cruise for a holiday. And he must have met this guy and said he was in the Navy. And this guy tells him, oh, Kavas Nanavati was my first cousin. And so Bhada immediately emailed me and said, I found you his first cousin and he's willing to talk. Because you see, it was very difficult to get anyone from Canada to speak. They all wanted to maintain this veil of privacy that the Nanavatis had built around them. So he said his name is Feroz Bhandara. And something rang a bell. I said, Feroz Bhandara, Houston. And I said, oh my God, Bapsi Sidhwa was a Bhandara. She's in Houston. So I immediately emailed her. And she says, oh yes, Kavas was my cousin. And yes, I was married to my first husband at that time. And I was very much in Bombay. And my mother-in-law came waving the paper and said, look what your cousin has done. I think you better go and see your aunt. And these are the kind of serendipitous encounters which really, really help the book.
Mike Bhada also cut class, right?
Right.
To go attend the trial. Tell us something about that.
About the trial, okay. Bombay had never seen anything like this, okay? And like fictional drama, this 20th century real-life passion play would keep requiring a suspension of disbelief. You needed to suspend it on day one itself. Here was a man who only the other day was unknown outside his own circles, and he was charged with murder to boot. Yet he was getting a degree of adulation which later rock stars would kill for. True, the tallest leaders of India's freedom struggle had been given a tumultuous reception, but that demographic was quite different. The patriotic crowds of the 1940s weren't comprised mainly of hysterical women dressed to the nines, and they never threw love notes and lipstick-smeared currency notes, even at the dishy Jawaharlal. Naturally, most in evidence were the two communities unhappily tied together in victim and accused, Sindhis and Parsis. The former seethed over the mood so palpably against their Prem Ahuja. The minority Parsis were there in full force, charged up to cheer for the hero of the hour. Yes, the Parsis had come en masse, Meenu Masa and Mani Masi too. From Adi to Zarina, Soli solicitor, Homi homeopath, Jimmy Gymkhanawala, Eddie on his Royal Enfield, Fali in his trusty Fiat, Sillu, Hillu, Villu and Pilu. They came on local trains from Dadar, Grant Road, even Thana, on buses from Kolaba and Baikala, in chauffeured Chevys from Malabar Hill. They bunked college, deserted their typist pools at Central Bank and the Tata companies at Bombay House. They came carrying hope in their hearts and strength in their forearms to elbow their way through this crush of humanity. Arthritic aunties and ponytailed pretties alike even knocked on unknown doors, pleading politely to be allowed onto the balconies of surrounding buildings, as if to watch the motorcade of a visiting head of state. Throughout the session's court trial, they screamed, Nanavati Zindabad. And in the court, if there was a hostile witness, they would say, shut up, sit down, and stuff like that. Then they threw those lipstick missives, even marriage proposals, in the fond hope of an imminent divorce. Hi, baap re, what would Prim Mama say? But the mammas were there too, jostling and screaming with the rest. You could safely presume that an intra-Parsi match or two was made in that incendiary atmosphere.
But many accounts of this case before leave Prem Ahuja as a very unidimensional figure. But you've managed to bring him alive, and among the people who helped you do that was another playboy, a noted Bombay playboy, who's a young man who's sitting there in a white kurta, Jacinth Cunha. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Ram, I really must join issue with you on this, because I think I really said that I wasn't going to complete this book and hand in my manuscript till I found out more about Prem Ahuja. And really the Ahujas had disappeared without trace. And it became a joke, and my friend Namita is sitting here, and became a joke that every time I went with her to Wellington Club, I would try to find a Sindhi over 80 and ask them, did you know the Ahujas? and I said, there has to be more about this man, and here I'm quoting from the book, that there has to be something more about the man than the grinning skull on the evidence table and the odor of promiscuity. And so it was very difficult, and I had actually messaged Jason that I wanted to speak to him because I wanted him to recreate the Bombay of that time. Because I hadn't grown up in Bombay, and I wasn't in Bombay at that time. And I never heard from him. But in the meanwhile, I managed to get quite a lot, from the archives, from other people, really from the Current and the Evening News and all what I wrote in the scroll about the cabarets and Churchgate and what a magical place it was. Then I was very busy writing, and I didn't want to go anywhere, but I had to go to the French National Day because they were going to be part of our Lit Fest, and I thought I was obliged to go. And I was about to leave, and I saw Jerson at the banquet hall, and I said, Jerson, you don't even answer SMSs. And he says, listen to this, he says, my phone is with my driver, and my driver doesn't read SMSs. So please do not send SMSs to Jerson. So he said, but why were you asking me? So I said, I wanted you to recreate Bombay. So he said, why? So I said, because I'm writing on the Nanavati case. And he says, Nanavati case? I used to party with Prem Ahuja. And I said, oh my God. And so that's how a lot about Prem Ahuja came about with that. But more than that, I then found out the gentleman who was the owner, and I will not name him because he has asked me to keep his anonymity. He was the principal whose jeeps and cars were being, which were being the dealer. Prem Ahuja was the dealer. So he said he was a very, very well-spoken man, very well turned out. He was one of our prime dealers. We never had a single day's problem with him. And then I met, then when Rustam, the movie came out, then again Mike Bhada, someone called him and said, oh, Prem Ahuja's secretary lives in our building in this, what is that building? Navroz Bagh, Godrej Bagh. She lives in, but of course by then, she had a paralytic stroke. And that was really the trouble with a lot of the sources, that you had to find someone who was old enough to have known the case and who still had a credible memory to go by. And there were many people who would have known fantastic stories about them, but unfortunately, they were victims of Alzheimer's, old age, or they had just passed on. So this secretary, naturally, she couldn't speak, but one of her relatives remembered the stories that she used to say about Prem Ahuja. And she said, once, I remember this very clearly, because once one of my colleagues spoke to me very rudely, and Prem boss pulled him up in front of the entire office and said, look, Sheru is the only woman who works in our office, and you better treat her with respect. And then, of course, she said, yes, that Sylvia lady used to come, but I don't think boss was giving her any much attention. And then, of course, she mentioned another lady as well. But secretaries are notoriously possessive about their bosses. But then more interesting was this case of Veena. Veena, who, she had been in a refugee camp in Mud Island, and Prem Ahuja was the camp commander. And she remembered him with a great deal of kindness because he was also a friend of her cousin. And he gave this family, which had left behind 8 properties in Karachi and had come as penniless refugees, and he ensured that the room that they got had a bathroom to itself. And that was very important for this family, trying to hold on to their dignity and their self-respect. And how was I sure that she was speaking about the same man? That was then, she was 13 years old, she had many more things on her mind, so she could well have been making a mistake. But she said, no, many years later, about 10 years later, he gave me a job in Universal Motors. And I worked with him as a part-timer, and then again, he was very, very kind to me.
But among the other things that you really sort of bring, the details that you bring alive that we didn't know about before, was the family's life when they went to Canada. What did you find out, and how did you find this out?
Well, actually, the Canada years had always been this closed book, and all the articles said the family went off to Canada, never to be heard, never to come back, and never to be heard of again. And I really thought that because when I was commissioned this book, I was in Calcutta, and there happened to be another friend of mine who had moved to Toronto, and when I was working on a book on the Parsis, and she had really helped me to connect with the Parsi diaspora in Toronto. So I said, oh, this is a good sign and a good omen, because I'll ask Kamal to help me. And Kamal did get me a lot of contacts, including the phone number of Sylvia Nanavati and the address. But nobody in Canada really wanted to speak. And in fact, there was one woman who had been every day at the trial. And I tried every trick in the journalist's book, to get her to speak. And she didn't. And then here's another serendipitous thing. Because I kind of had holed myself up. I wasn't going anywhere. And after many months, I went to my cousin. And she said, where have you been? You've disappeared. So I said, oh, I've been working on the book on the Nanavati case. And she said, oh, I went to the trial every single day. So here I was going all over the world trying to find someone who had been, and there was my cousin who had been there. Anyway, finally, I don't know if Jean Moose is here. Anyway, so she found me a contact, and she said, I will get her to speak to you. And then she had been introduced to the Nanavatis when she herself had, moved to Toronto, and the Parsi community was trying to make everyone feel at home. And she said they were a very happy married couple. They, they had a very nice home, and they had a lovely Irish setter. And I'll read a little bit from there. So I told you that she had met them, and she said, so her cousin had thrown a dinner party so that she could be introduced to local Parsis. I know that they were welcomed by the community with open and forgiving arms, and the incident was never mentioned to my knowledge. The Nanavatis were a happy and normal family with children and later grandchildren and a beautiful Irish setter. Then there was Feroz Bhandara, the friend who Mike found, who had, as a 6-year-old, been dragged, by his mother from Lahore to Bombay to do hand-holding with his Masi, his mother's sister. And Bhandara's sister, Bapsi Sidhwa, made occasional trips. And the astute novelist's take on this was different. She says, Kavas's past made him popular. He and Sylvia were invited everywhere, mainly as a source of hush-hush gossipy conversations. Then Kavas became quite a pillar of the impressive Toronto community, and he was even appointed a trustee of its prayer hall. And after retiring for many years, he was a volunteer at the Joseph Brant Hospital. Then, of course, there was, Bapsi. Bapsi tells us this story that, he became a fast-talking insurance salesman. And, of course, the irony of it was that Nanavati had killed a man in a building called Jeevan Jyot, which is named after the emblem of the Life Insurance Corporation, and then went on to become a life insurance officer himself. And in fact, J.R.D. Tata gave him a job at the United India Assurance Company. And there is a mistake, not anything that Ram has pointed out, but which subsequent people have written to me after the book. Because I thought, because all the family told me that he left for Canada like within the year, but as it happened, he went after 4 years. And then, so now this Farida, I haven't mentioned her by name. So she lost touch with the Nanavatis till around 2000. Then Sylvia phoned to ask if I would give her teenage granddaughter Indira piano lessons. So we met again. Kavas and Sylvia had both retired by then. I next met Sylvia at her home when Kavas passed away. I could not attend the funeral, but some months later, I heard Indira playing the Arabesque No. 1 beautifully at the annual recital, dedicating it to her late grandfather. He was a much-loved father and grandfather.
Thanks. I think on this musical note, let's open up the interrogation of our two guests to the audience. Put up your hand. We'll bring a mic to you. Is this going to be a defense of the Parsis or the Sindhis?
Neither.
Or?
Neither. Is it working? Okay.
Yes.
Ram, you were just about to say the legal points you pointed out to Justice Chandrachud, because of which you were able to overturn the case. Could you tell us any one of those and you think we'll understand them?
You want me or Ram?
Ram.
Ram, talk about the towel.
No, not about covers. The legal points that you pointed out
much
to
of this
Justice.
hinged around the sticky towel.
No, he's not sure
And-
talking about
No, I'm asking the legal points.
legal
And,
points,
The
yes.
legal points.
That is,
And, yeah.
and also the sticky towel.
What's the first question?
actually there were these several things that she pointed out, the misdirections to the jury, and they're all in the book. They really are all in the book, so, I mean, unless you want to add it.
Darling, whatever you want to ask, I mean, I'm ready I'm ready to be cross-examined, don't worry.
You don't think they understood?
I have not committed murder.
You don't think they understood the question?
So would you like to say, would you like
I
to
spoke
tell
into
them
them.
as to, how you really told the public prosecutor about the towel, and then those misdirections to the jury. That is what she's asking
Yes,
about.
it's true, absolutely. I must tell you that even Chandrachud, who was appearing for the prosecution in the High Court, he is a great lawyer who ultimately became the Chief Justice of India. But at that time, he was more on the civil side and didn't have so much experience of criminal work and criminal law. But I must tell you that the man was a genius. Once he understood a point, he will put it across with such great eloquence as if the man is a complete master of law. I mean, that is how he became ultimately the Chief Justice of India. But I must say that my contribution to Nanavati's conviction was the discovery that in spite of the fact that he was very fair to the judge, he had committed some serious errors of law which only did one thing, that the test of perversity of the verdict is not the test of allowing the appeal.
All right. Are there any more questions? Well, can you wait for the mic to come to you, please? Oh, there.
You came in a little late, I think, because I said that in the beginning that I had been commissioned by Juggernaut, and that kind of got me thinking. And then I kind of really wanted to know as to why this was a case that refused to die, and that why was it continuing to get an afterlife in films, in books, in fiction, and that there had never been a comprehensive non-fiction account of a case which really had all this impact on jurisprudence. And we haven't talked about the media, and we've got Rita over here, and what Rusi Karanjia did with that case has never been equaled, even in this hyperventilating media that we are heir to today. So there was all that, and I thought that we really do need to look at these principal characters a little closely, because I do not believe in entitlement, whether it's of the Parsis or of the Navy. And I really thought that, and really that how on earth did a murderer or a man who's really gone into a man's bedroom, shot an unarmed man, an undressed man, to all intents and purposes except for his towel, and he has become the unalloyed hero, and how is the murder victim turned into the unmitigated villain? And also, why are we making this poor Sylvia into this lobotomized creature who's been hypnotized? She was obviously in love with that man. She walked into it with her eyes wide open. She was willing to speak to and tell Kavas about it, even if you believe Khandalawala's construct that he was reneging and was backing out of any proposal of marriage. So I thought everything really needed to get a fresh look and a detailed look.
I hope all of you have seen one movie which was produced about this Nanavati case, in which it was such a flagrant disparagement of facts that they showed that he was acquitted by the jury in the trial court.
Yeah.
All right, put up your hand. There.
This is my question directed at Mr. Jethmalani. What are the legal imperatives for a governor or the head of the country to grant someone a pardon, especially if he's been convicted by the High Court? What was the raison d'etre to let this man go free?
You see, when the matter is before the judiciary and a man has been convicted in a judicial hearing before the High Court, his only remedy is to appeal to the Supreme Court and get bail. But don't worry, some irregular things happen, but I don't mind that those things happen, because after all, Nanavati was Nanavati, and the man was the victim of a person's sins who had sinned very badly. And so every sympathy with Nanavati, and doesn't matter if the governor also was sympathetic. But I must tell you that the whole Communist Party was with Nanavati.
But the Bar Council, but I really must, since Mr. Jethmalani is being very kind to the judiciary and all that, but the entire and this is another factor of the case, that it divided the whole legal bloc into two, because the Bar Council objected, the advocates' body objected, and therefore the court had to appoint an amicus curiae, because the people who should have been defending the governor's order, they refused to come because they said we don't support it. So it was a huge chapter, and I know when Mr. Iqbal Chagla wrote to me after the book, and he said, I'm really surprised that such an important chapter in jurisprudence has not been written about till now.
But I assure you that neither I nor Memi did anything to obstruct his bail.
Is Aruna Jagtiani here? Yeah, okay. So she's the daughter of Bhai Pratap, who was, where there was that exchange, that prisoner exchange, if you like. And he was this fantastic philanthropic Sindhi who set up this whole refugee settlement colony. And even the father of L.K. Advani, came and stayed over there. And so Aruna told me a great deal about her father and how, he had been, sentenced to jail only because of a corrupted witness. Whereas Nanavati went to jail on very legal and correct grounds.
There's a question here.
Question for Bachi and or Ram. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the end of the jury system and this particular case?
Jury system, end of jury system.
Now you are going into very contentious matters, because on this I cannot give you any particular evidence at the present moment, but the authorities that were in power knew that the jury trials were being misused by reason of the lack of character in some of our jurors. And it is very difficult. These days, you have to take care of the integrity of judges now, who are so few and far between. Can you take care of the whole population? Everyone is qualified, who have done some educational qualification is entitled to become a juror. And you don't even know what he is about, what does he do in private life, what sins he is himself committing. Nobody knows. So that in this particular case, be sure that the jury trials were abolished, because they found that this was the most significant and a very telling case of jury misbehavior.
And anyway, the 14th Law Commission had been apprised of the matter, and they had said that this is a system which has been transplanted from Britain, and it has failed to take root in India. Is Bridget here? Bridget Fernandez? No? So she's the daughter of Reginald William Pierce, the only juror who dissented, and on account of which, then the judge could order it to be referred to the. I just want to say one para here. Pierce was not a man easily swayed by extraneous factors, and there were plenty of those in Judge Mehta's hysterical courtroom. He was the only man unmoved by Karl Khandalawala's fabled oratory, the Navy's masked power, the sad-eyed but proud accused, and certainly not impressed by the armada of fans. Says Bridget, for my father, things were white or they were black. And then I've added, the dazzling array of whites notwithstanding, R.W. Pierce saw black.
Hello. Mr. Jethmalani, now on the lighter side of the case, do you recall any humorous histrionics of Karl Khandala in the courtroom?
Well, frankly, Karl Khandalawala was not a great man of humor. Huh?
That's right. I want you to recall.
He was a very, very serious-minded person. And we were all friends. We have been friends at the bar. I don't go about quarreling with my friends on whichever side they are.
You leave that for Bachchi.
But Karl Khandalawala called one of the, he called who was he? I think he called the surgeon who was on the side of the prosecution. He actually called him a congenital idiot.
Let's take a last question there.
Mr. Jethmalani, I hope it's not an irrelevant question. Why does America still continue with the jury system?
Well, listen, the real answer is that the Americans have more faith in their people than India has.
And on that pessimistic note, I think we're all out of time. 60 years later, and we still continue to be obsessed by a murder and a sticky towel.
I am not upset, man. Now,
thanks, Bachchi. Thanks, Mr. Jethmalani. Thank you all.
Bachchi, darling, thank you for calling me, my darling.
We'd like to thank our panel for an exceedingly fascinating discussion. Congratulations once again to you, Bachchi, for your book. Thank you to all our partners who have made this evening possible: Juggernaut, Avid Learning, Soda Bottle Opener Wala, Animas, Royal Opera House Mumbai, the Gondal family, and Honorary Director of the Opera House, Ashish Doshi. Thank you, audience, for being here, and have a great evening.